And Callie, thanks for all the work that you've done on behalf of the Wellington business community too. I am going to start out by popping up who we are and what we do. Okay, can everybody see that first slide? It just says who we are and what we do.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. Once again, my name's Mike O'Connell. I run the Small Business Development Center in Larimer County. There's about 1,000 SBDCs around the country, and our mission is we do street smart business education and connection to resources. And we do that through 3 tactics. We do a whole bunch of free one-on-one consulting. We do a lot of trainings and workshops, and then we connect people to useful business resources if that's a service that we don't provide. So we've been doing this in Larimer County for about 30 years, and it's been a very rewarding job. I'm a former business owner myself. I owned a furniture manufacturing company. And what I wanted to do and what Kaylee graciously set up along with the Wellington Chamber is to have this opportunity just to talk about the new PPP and EIDL programs that came out of the 2021 CARES Act, which is now actually called the Economic Aid Act. So, and by the way, we have a relatively small group today. This is very informal. If you have any questions as we go along, just yell them out or else put them in the chat, and Kaylee will be my chat wing person. So we'll make sure all the questions get answered. And for some of you, you may know more about this. Others, this might be new information, but we do want to make sure you've at least got a point of contact and are aware of some key deadlines, etc. So let me start with this pie chart that basically explains, if you remember before Christmas, Congress passed some legislation to provide help for individuals and businesses for COVID recovery. And that was then signed into law by then President Trump just after Christmas. So we ended up with this roughly $900 billion Economic Aid Act. And I want to talk a bit about where that funding is going, where it's slated to go, just so you have a perspective of where that money was intended to go. And I'll start at the noon position right here. The first chunk on the right is stimulus payments. That was the direct $600 to each American. Following that is an extension of the pandemic unemployment insurance, which I'm going to talk about a little more in detail. There was some extensions of rental help plus food aid via SNAP. And then when you get down into the green at the bottom part, the green shows the business recovery pieces. The biggest part was a next round of PPP loans, which I'm going to talk in detail about. In fact, I'll spend most of this presentation talking about that. The smaller green wedge on the right, which says EIDL, that stands for Economic Injury and Disaster Loan. That was funded again through the rest of this year. And then there's a new piece called Shuttered Venues, and that is a reimbursement via a grant for venues and theaters, et cetera, that were shut down completely through a large part of 2020. And then continuing along that pie chart, you've got additional funding for transportation, for education and childcare, most of which had to do with mitigating COVID in those organizations. So that is basically where the money is slated to go. And by the way, everything you see in the red and the right side, that all goes under the general bucket, if you will, of family and individual direct relief. And I'm going to talk just about a couple of those red pieces for a minute. So the stimulus program, if you're an individual earning $75,000 or less, you're going to get $600. If you're a couple earning double that, you're going to get $1,200. And then if you're a qualifying family, you can get $600 per child. So if you're a qualifying family of 4, you can get up to $2,400 of stimulus money. And the go-to organization to find out your status of that or check into your payment is the IRS. And we've got a link there under the IRS portal of Get My Payment if you want to know the status. The next part I'm going to talk about because it's not in our area as the SBDC, but we work very closely with the Larimer County Workforce Center and the Colorado Department of Labor, which is the statewide organization. And if you're a business owner, you might have a lot of questions about, hey, I changed this employee's hours, they filed for unemployment insurance, what does that mean to me? Or I had to lay off a couple people, what's a resource that I can give them to get in line for this unemployment insurance? And the answer to that is, here in Larimer County, you're going to go to the Larimer County Workforce Center. They have offices in Loveland, main office in Fort Collins. And this unemployment insurance, which began last year, it's also available this time around to solopreneurs, to gig workers, and that traditionally has not been available to those sorts of business owners. If for one of the things that we had a lot of questions about last year was should I be chasing a PPP loan or filing for unemployment insurance? And if you're a solopreneur or a gig worker, you're going to be better off financially to pursue unemployment insurance than you are getting a PPP loan, because simply it's not expected to be paid back. It's a benefit to you. So when the Economic Aid Act passed, this unemployment insurance got extended another 11 weeks. Last year was 39 weeks. It's going out to 50 weeks right now through March 14th. And the new payment is $300 per week, which was down from the $600 per week that happened last year. And I put a couple of links in there of who to contact for information about this. Our local people here in Larimer County are very good. They're responsive, and you get pretty prompt answers from them. One additional thing I will say about this is some of you might have heard in the news about some of the expanded coverages that now President Biden is talking about. Those are proposals. They're not law yet. But this is one of the areas where this will be extended. He's talking about taking this from the end of March, which is the current law, mid-March, which is the current law, out through September. So those are the two pieces in red. I'm going to move on next to what you saw in the green highlight, and this is called Economic Aid Act Tools for the Small Business Owner. So this is stuff you should be aware of, or at least have a point of contact to talk to about it. And I'm going to talk about the Payroll Protection Program. This year, the terminology is broken down into two parts. There is a first draw, which means simply you didn't get any money through this program last year. And there's also a second draw, which is you got money last year and now you want to apply for more money. I'll talk a bit about that breakout. There's the SBA Economic Disaster Loan. There's a lot of activity going on in the debt relief area, which I'm going to talk about. And then I'll talk a bit about the Shuttered Venues Grant. And I already talked about the Pandemic Unemployment Insurance Extension. So those are the main categories I'm going to cover. And let me start with the PPP loans, which is the biggest dollar amount in that bucket. For those of you that weren't familiar with it, the intent is simply to keep people employed with their current employer and to maintain your staffing and pay levels. And this loan, which is forgivable if you do it right, is going to fund your payroll. It's going to pay your rent, all of your normal operating expenses and supplier costs. It won't pay for extraordinary things like construction, acquisitions, things like that. It's meant to support your operating expenses. And the loan amount that you can get is 2.5 times your monthly payroll, and payroll can include other benefits such as healthcare that you're paying as a business owner. It's a 2-year, 1% loan, so virtually no money, with full loan forgiveness if you use at least 60% payroll, use it for 60% payroll at least, including keeping up your staffing and pay levels. Now, the way you get this loan is to basically go through a bank. The terminology is it's an SBA 7A lender. Well, that's pretty much all the banks and all the micro lenders in Colorado. So a lot of our local banks are very familiar with this program. So you access this by going to one of your banks or ideally your current bank and applying for this program. At the very bottom of this, application deadline of March 31st. And that's highlighted because this is a tighter time frame than what we saw last year. Last year, you could apply for this thing for about 7 months. Well, it's a much tighter time frame this year. So I'm encouraging people, if you think you might want it, then please be aware of the deadline. On my next slide here, I'm just going to talk a bit about some of the improvements that are in the program this year compared to how it ran last year. First bullet, they have broadened the forgivable expenses, COVID mitigation stuff, IT help, that is a forgivable expense. They've eliminated the requirement that if you got an EIDL advance or grant, last year that was going to be subtracted from your PPP forgiveness. That onerous requirement got eliminated. I'll talk a bit more about that in one of the upcoming slides. And this year, you as the borrower, you select what you want your forgiveness period to be. Last year, it was either 8 or 24 weeks. Now, you as the borrower get to pick a period from between 8 to 24 weeks. So if you want it to be 18 weeks, you can make that your forgiveness period. They've simplified some of the application processes. The bullet that's next to the bottom, DMO is Destination Marketing Organization, and additional nonprofits are eligible to apply. Kaylee, I know, I don't think Wellington has a DMO, but Loveland Fort Collins does. Estes Park, they're eligible to apply for this now. And one of the things that we've seen a lot, not only behind the scenes, but also as far as who's available to apply, if you look at the bottom bullet, there is a lot more emphasis on supporting lenders that serve the low to moderate income community. There's a lot more effort being put out there to get this money to the people that really need it. And I'll, again, talk more about that. So those are the changes, the primary changes from last year to this year. I talked about this already. First draw simply means you're getting the money the first time. Second draw is you are reapplying after getting money last year. And I want to talk a bit about the first draw for those of you that might not have applied last year. A couple of requirements that almost everybody we deal with meets. You've got to have 500 or fewer employees. The loan maximum is $10 million. And one thing that's new this year is there is $15 billion that is set aside for borrowers with 10 or less employees, or perhaps they're in a low to moderate income neighborhood. In the scheme of things, there's very little areas of Larimer County that meet the LMI requirements, but there are a lot of businesses that have 10 or less employees. So this year they are setting aside some money to serve those smaller businesses. The second draw, again, this is the part where you're reapplying. You can apply for this. You have to have used your first loan money. The term is you've got to exhaust it. It doesn't mean you have to have all your forgiveness wrapped up. You just have to have used the money. You have to show a revenue decline in any comparable quarter from 19 to 20 of 25%. So in other words, if you did 200,000 in the second quarter of 2019, you've got to be below 150,000 in 2020 if you want to be eligible for this. And you can pick a quarter that you might apply for this. So you got to have a revenue decline. The maximum loan. Yeah, Kaylee, question?
Mike, just a real quick question. I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I did have somebody contact me, and their question was, what if they have not, what if their business started in January of 2020 and they do not have a 2019 quarter to compare it to?
Did they buy the business or did they start it?
The business started, they got their business license in December of 19.
Okay.
And officially started in January of 20.
Kelly, I'm going to suggest, let me look into that. I don't think I can answer it here. I will say there are some special rules for people that started stuff in the middle part of this program. So I will check into that and get you an answer on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep. One quick question. Were they operating in 2019 or did they not start operating until 2020?
They were not operating until 2020.
Okay, I will get you an answer on that. The third bullet point, the maximum loan amount is $2 million. If you recall, it was $10 million for the first draw, $2 million limit here. And there has been an interesting wrinkle on this for people that are in the restaurant and lodging business, which, as we all know, got hit really hard with the effects of COVID and the regulations thereafter. When you did your PPP calculation, if you're anything other than a restaurant or food business, you multiply your payroll by 2.5 times. If you're in the restaurant business, you can use a 3.5 multiplier. So you get to apply for more payroll coverage as a restaurant and lodging company. So that was a nice wrinkle for those businesses. 300 employees max. And again, there's a chunk of money that's set aside for borrowers with 10 employees or less. And that is the keynotes on second draw. I just want to show you a few things on the application. The SBA about 5 days ago kicked out some forms, 2483 and 2483 SD or second draw, and that will show you what borrower information is needed. Now, banks are not going to use the SBA form. They're usually going to generate their own forms on their own letterhead, but they've got to get the information the SBA is asking for. So these forms are pretty handy to look at to see what info you need or are going to be expected to provide to your lender. And you can click on the links here for both of those forms and get an idea of what information is going to be needed. I do want to talk a bit about forgiveness, and there's a lot of businesses that got PPP loans last year that haven't done the forgiveness part. That's completely understandable and normal. What the forgiveness calculation is looking to see is, did the employer maintain the employee and compensation levels? Did they spend the loan proceeds on payroll, at least 60%, and other allowable expenses? In other words, they didn't use it to go out and buy a competitor. That wouldn't be considered an eligible expense. Third bullet, at least 60% of the loan must be spent on payroll costs. And as a borrower, you have about 10 months to complete your forgiveness process from the time your time period ended that you were using for the PPP calculation. So if that happened to be December of last year, you've got till roughly October to wrap up your forgiveness process with your lender. And I've been asked multiple times, well, when did the forgiveness portal or process open? And that's a varying answer depending on how your bank is handling it. Some banks already have this up and running. Other banks don't even have their portal available where you can go in and apply for forgiveness to get that process rolling. So it depends completely on how your bank is handling it, because remember, this is being handled by the private sector banking system. Before I jump into economic injury disaster loans, Kaylee, should I stop there for a minute, just see if there's any questions about PPP, who to contact, deadlines, anything like that we should discuss?
Yeah, let me do a quick. So if anybody wants to ask a question, you should be able to unmute yourself at this time.
Okay.
I do not see anything in the chat.
I will keep rolling, Kaylee. Thank you. The next part that I'm going to talk about is a smaller dollar amount, but there were a lot of Colorado businesses that took advantage of this. It's called the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. I actually had one of these several years ago when I had my furniture company. I had a wildfire go through northern Arizona and it wiped out a bunch of my furniture dealers, customers. I applied for this and I got it, and it was pretty helpful for me in running my business. COVID, though, has been a real strain on the SBA disaster group that manages this, because they're used to dealing with regional crises, fires in Arizona, earthquakes in California, hurricanes in Louisiana. This is the first time they've dealt with a national pandemic. So it's been a capacity load on them. But to tell you a bit about the loan program, it is a 30-year loan. It's meant to cover the business owner for working capital expenses, operating expenses, and it's generally more flexible than the PPP loan. There's no requirement about how you have to use it except use it for working capital expenses. It's 3.7% interest, and there's no payments owed in the first year. One thing, if you look at the third bullet that was new last year is business owners that applied for this could get a $10,000 advance, which is actually a grant, and that ended up being $1,000 per employee. And we don't have clear guidance of whether that's going to continue again or not. So you're going to have to stay tuned, and Kaylee will certainly update you about how that's going to work, because the intention was from Treasury when this thing got passed was that the $10,000 was supposed to go to each business. And then the SBA tweaked it and said, no, it's $1,000 per employee. So we don't quite know what the guidance is yet. There's been rumblings about businesses that didn't get the full 10,000 last year getting made whole to the 10,000. We don't know if a business owner should apply for this or if the $20 billion that was funded is just going to people that already applied. If you look at the next bullet down, it's only intended though to be one loan per EIN, employer identification number, or business. So if you did get 10,000 last year, don't bother reapplying. You're not going to get more money through this program this year. And unlike the PPP loans, this is an important distinction. You apply for this through the SBA disaster group. That's their website. I do not believe this portal is open yet to actually apply for this, but the application is open through thanks, Kelly. The application is open through December 31st, but they will run out of money before then. So we are just keeping our eyes and ears open about upcoming guidance from the SBA on this. The next piece I wanted to talk about is the Shuttered Venues Grant. This is new this year. There were a lot of theaters, museums that were decimated by COVID, and this is meant to be support for the live theater, either operator and or promoter of those venues that you see on the screen. The way this grant works, and it is a grant, not a loan, is that you get 45% of your 2019 revenue, which is the last year that the venue would have been operating at full steam. So it's a fairly significant chunk of money. One of the requirements is that you can't do the Shuttered Venues Grant and apply for a PPP loan this year. If you applied for PPP last year and got money, that's fine. That was last year. The Shuttered Venue opportunity wasn't around, but you can't apply for the Shuttered Venues Grant and a PPP loan in 2021. You do have to be able to prove a 25% revenue reduction. And if you're one of those venues that were shut down completely, you do get first priority, both for applying and consideration if you've got revenue declines that are 90% or 70%. So if you really got hammered from a revenue standpoint, you are, theoretically speaking, first in line for money through this venue. There is a 5 business per owner max. That's to prevent like a big national theater chain from applying and getting a whole ton of money when this thing is targeted for the small business owner. And as I mentioned, this is also handled through the SBA disaster group as comparable to the economic injury disaster loan. So there is not a dedicated portal to apply for this yet, but we do expect one fairly quickly from the SBA. I am going to talk about another couple of changes that we saw come out of the Economic Aid Act that don't fit neatly into one of those buckets that I just talked about. There's a whole bunch of notes on this screen, 4 of them, and they're all intended to increase liquidity into the banking system. They're trying to make it more advantageous for borrowers to borrow money. They're trying to make it easier for banks to loan money. So that's why you're seeing things like loan guarantee increases to the banks from the SBA, fee waivers, increased loan dollar amount limits to microlenders that typically lend to small and low to moderate income communities. The express loan, which is a quick method of getting money to smaller business for bridge loans, that was increased from 250 to 300,000. And then we've also expanded, or the SBA has also expanded the debt relief program. And I'm going to talk about this on the next slide here. Some of you might have benefited from this possibly, but last year when CARES originally came out, if you had an SBA loan, the SBA paid, or your bank paid, principal and interest for 6 months on that loan. So that was a pretty nice benefit. And this year in 2021, that's going to be continued for another 3 months is the current plan. And I believe there's going to be some emphasis to try to, again, direct that to low to moderate income communities or smaller businesses. So stay tuned from your bank about additional guidance for that or what that's going to look like. The second bullet down is if you get a new SBA loan, the SBA will pay principal and interest for 6 months on that. So again, big incentive to keep people borrowing money for the banks to loan money. And the last bullet point, that simply refers to the fact that we still have clients in Estes Park in Southwest Loveland that had SBA disaster loans from 2013 from the floods. Those payments last year were deferred out through the whole year, and now they're going to be deferred again through March at least of this year. So they're not canceled or prepaid, they're just deferred. So benefit to the borrower. And the last chunk I'm going to talk about here as far as these Economic Aid Act programs is the tax improvements that were made. I mentioned that the EIDL advance won't be counted against your PPP forgiveness. If some of you already did your forgiveness and you got dinged because you got an EIDL grant, there is supposed to be some sort of remittance happening from the SBA to your bank, to you, to get that money back to you. We're not sure exactly how or when that process is going to work, but that's the intention of the legislation. And then the second bullet was a biggie. The SBA was saying that, hey, take your eligible business expenses and that's what you use for PPP forgiveness. And meanwhile, the IRS was saying, yeah, but if you do that, you can't use those normal business expenses for your normal tax reduction. So that was a real slap in the face for a lot of business owners. That got straightened out through this current legislation so that you are allowed as a business owner to use business expenses for both PPP forgiveness as well as your normal business operating deductions. So big improvement there. I've just got a couple more slides here, but so what are we recommending? I mean, there is some stuff we don't know yet. What can the business owner do to kind of be prepared? So this is our punch list of things that I would, as a former business owner, be prepared with. The first thing I would do is I'd make sure you've got your key documents handy, both digitally and paper. I'd have your federal tax returns for 17, 18, 19. With the understanding for most of you, 2020 isn't going to be done yet. I'd have your business financials, profit, loss, and balance sheet for 2018, 2019, and 2020 year to date, whatever you have there. I would also have your, I'd have your monthly / quarterly top line sales or revenue numbers for 2019 and 2020, because for some of these programs, you might need to prove that you had a revenue decline, and month-to-month sales is generally how that proof is going to happen. So it's far better to have a spreadsheet with that information handy than to be on some online portal trying to fill something out while you're fumbling trying to find that information. So I would prepare that ahead of time. Second bullet, I would talk to your banker. The easiest path to get a PPP extension, if you got one last year, is to go to the same banker that loaned you one in 2020. So I would have that discussion. If you got an accountant, I would talk to her or him. I'd also keep in touch with your local economic development folks. That's Cali and Wellington, the Chamber of Commerce, and us. And the reason I'm saying that is right now, there is a lot of stuff coming at the business owner. There's this program, which is primarily federal. There's CARES Act dollars that are being funneled through the county. We've got a small business relief program that's out with a pretty tight deadline to apply. So you really don't want, you can make a decision about whether you want to pursue something, but you don't want to have missed something where you missed the deadline, you didn't apply, et cetera. So I would definitely keep in touch with those three organizations to make sure you're current on things. The fourth bullet, we're advising that if for some reason you didn't get the full 10K of EIDL, stay advanced, stay informed, and just keep that in the back of your head, because there is a possibility, not a guarantee, but a possibility that you might get more, and we'll see how that guidance comes down from the federal government. We're also recommending, talk to somebody if you need to. It could be your banker, it could be somebody at the SBDC, it could be somebody at the chamber. And then the sixth bullet, we're really advising people, keep good records of how you spend your PPP and EIDL money, any grant money, because if you're ever asked to back it up or you need to prove that you used it for allowable expenses, it's awfully tough to recreate that 6 or 9 months later. So keep good records of how you do that. And don't forget, your PPP loan application deadline as it currently stands is March 31st. So those are key things that anybody can do right now and make a note so that you're prepared for what's probably going to be coming down the pike as we see it. So, this is our contact information, Loveland Business Development Center, our Larimer SBDC. You know who Callie is, you know who the chamber is in Wellington. NOCO Recovers is also a one-stop shop that's got a lot of good information on it that's being managed countywide. This is our SBDC team. That's me on the right. The woman on the, I'm sorry, that's me on the left. The woman on the far right is Kat Hart, who runs the Loveland Business Development Center, with Terry Donovan Kearns in the purple blouse in the center, and Becky Doffett, who is our marketing administrative guru. So that's the team that could help you with a lot of this tactics. And we're going to continue to have programs and information about these federal programs and other grant and loan programs as that information comes down the pipe. So, Callie, I'm going to stop the screen share there, but that's the end of my formal part, and we can deal with any questions or follow up on anything from there.
I say it looks like we had a few people drop off just for time, but
Yep.
I will definitely make this presentation available to everybody who has questions. But yeah, if anybody has questions, feel free to, should be able to unmute yourself, or you can type your question in the chat.
And I hope this was helpful. If anyone's got any questions or any suggestions, we're always open to that. And Callie, you've asked a couple of things that I will follow up on too.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for joining.
Okay.
All right. Well, I think we're good. Thank you. Thank you,
Okay.
Mike, for all of this. I appreciate the information, and I will talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Give us a holler if you need anything. Good luck. Thanks, Callie.